What if the most feared warriors in history won their battles before they ever drew their swords? For 3 centuries, Viking raiders terrorized Europe with a weapon more powerful than any blade. They had mastered the art of sleep itself. The morning of June 8th, 793 CE, started like any other at Lindisfarne Monastery. Brother Ellard climbed the stone steps to ring the bell for morning prayers. The North Sea stretched endlessly before him, calm and gray. Then he saw them, dark shapes cutting through the mist like sea monsters. Dragon ships. The Vikings who stepped onto that English beach weren't ordinary raiders. They moved with purpose that chilled the watching monks. While other armies stumbled from exhaustion after long sea voyages, these warriors showed no signs of weariness. They had sailed for days across treacherous waters, yet they fought with the fury of men who had just awakened from perfect rest. Brother Ellard survived that terrible day. Years later, he would write in his chronicle, "They showed unnatural endurance, as if sustained by dark magic. No mortal men could fight with such strength after such a journey." But it wasn't magic. It was something far more calculated. Deep in the Norwegian fjords, at a place called Borg, archaeologists have uncovered the truth. Dr. Neil Price leads a team that has spent decades digging through ancient Viking sites. What they found changed everything historians thought they knew about Norse warfare. When we opened the sleeping chambers of Borg, we realized we weren't looking at ordinary bedrooms, Dr. Price explains, holding up a carved amber amulet. These were laboratories for human enhancement. The sleeping areas weren't random. They were aligned with star patterns, positioned to catch specific angles of moonlight. Around each sleeping space, the archaeologists found carefully arranged collections of herbs, protective charms, and iron implements. Everything was precise. Everything had purpose. Other sites across Scandinavia revealed similar patterns. At Birka in Sweden, Price's team discovered what they now call berserker sleep kits, leather pouches containing dried plants, carved bones, and metal tools that transformed ordinary rest into something extraordinary. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by terrified English monks, recorded Viking raids with bewildered horror. They fought for days without rest. One entry reads, "Their eyes burned with inner fire, as if they drew strength from the very air." But how did sleep become a weapon of war? The answer lies in the Viking understanding of rest as a journey between worlds. While Christian Europe saw sleep as weakness, a time when the soul was vulnerable to demons, the Norse viewed it as a pathway to power. Their warriors didn't just sleep, they traveled. Archaeological evidence reveals the sophistication of these practices. At grave sites across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, researchers have found warrior burials containing identical sets of tools: small iron knives, amber beads, dried herbs wrapped in leather, and carved wooden figurines. These weren't random grave goods. They were the equipment of sleep mastery. The herbs tell their own story. Chemical analysis reveals combinations of valerian root, meadowsweet, and other plants that modern science recognizes as powerful sleep aids. But the Vikings weren't just trying to fall asleep faster. They were manipulating the very structure of rest itself. Dr. Matthew Walker, a leading sleep researcher, has studied the archaeological evidence. What the Vikings discovered, he explains, was that sleep isn't just about recovery. It's about preparation. They found ways to store energy like a coiled spring, ready to unleash devastating power when battle called. The tactical advantages were enormous. While enemy armies grew weary from long marches and sleepless nights, Viking forces remained sharp and alert. They could fight longer, think clearer, and strike with precision when their opponents stumbled from exhaustion. Contemporary accounts from across Europe describe the same phenomenon. Frankish chronicles speak of Viking armies that showed no signs of weariness, though they had sailed many days. Irish annals record raiders who could fight from dawn to dusk without pause. Spanish texts describe Norsemen who seemed to possess the endurance of demons. The secret wasn't supernatural. It was systematic. The sleeping chambers at Borg reveal the careful thought behind these practices. The rooms were designed for specific types of rest. Some were pitch black, others positioned to catch the first light of dawn. The temperatures were controlled through clever ventilation systems. Even the sounds were managed. Some chambers were built for absolute silence, others positioned to catch the rhythm of ocean waves. But the most intriguing discovery came from the center of each sleeping area. Archaeologists found circular depressions worn smooth by countless bodies. Chemical analysis of the stone revealed traces of the same herbs found in the warrior graves. These weren't just sleeping spaces. They were ritual sites where ordinary men transformed themselves into something more. The implications were staggering. Viking raids weren't random acts of violence. They were precisely planned operations that began not with the sharpening of swords, but with the mastery of sleep. Warriors prepared for battle by first preparing for rest. As Brother Ellard watched the dragon ships disappear over the horizon on that June morning in 793, he couldn't have imagined that their greatest weapon lay not in their iron blades, but in their ability to turn the most vulnerable time of day into their greatest strength. The Vikings had discovered something that modern military forces are only beginning to understand. True power comes not from avoiding rest, but from mastering it completely. They had turned sleep itself from a weakness into the ultimate weapon. The most elite Viking warriors called it the small death, a ritual so secret that only fragments survive in ancient texts. But archaeological evidence reveals that this practice turned ordinary fighters into the berserkers who terrorized medieval Europe. The ritual began 3 days before battle. Warriors would gather in sacred groves, far from the noise of villages and the comfort of hearth fires. They brought nothing but their weapons, their sleep kits, and their absolute commitment to transformation. Eric Bloodaxe, the legendary Norwegian king, was said to have perfected this art. The Heimskringla saga describes how he could remain motionless for hours, as if dead, yet his spirit burned with the fire of Odin himself. This wasn't mere meditation. It was a calculated manipulation of consciousness that modern science is only beginning to understand. The foundation of Viking sleep mastery lay in their worship of Odin, the one-eyed god who sacrificed himself on the world tree to gain wisdom. According to Norse mythology, Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, piercing himself with his own spear to discover the secrets of the runes. This self-imposed ordeal revealed the power hidden in the spaces between life and death. Viking warriors sought to follow their god's example. The prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, preserves fragments of this knowledge. It describes how elite fighters would undergo the small death before battle, entering trance-like states that allowed them to store energy like a coiled spring. Dr. Sarah Clemeni, a sleep researcher at the University of Copenhagen, has studied these ancient practices. What the Vikings discovered, she explains, matches what we now know about polyphasic sleep, the ability to enter multiple sleep cycles in a single day. But they took it further. They learned to control not just when they slept, but how they slept. The ritual was precise. Warriors would fast for exactly 3 days, consuming nothing but water and herbal mixtures. The herbs weren't random. Chemical analysis reveals specific combinations: valerian root for deep sleep, meadowsweet for pain relief, and other plants that modern pharmacology recognizes as powerful psychoactive substances. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who witnessed Norse rituals in 922 CE, recorded his astonishment at what he saw. The berserkers lay motionless for hours, he wrote. Their bodies appeared dead, yet their eyes burned with inner fire. When they rose, they moved as if possessed by the spirits of wolves and bears. This wasn't possession. It was mastery. The Vikings understood something that modern military forces are rediscovering. Sleep is not a passive state. It's an active process that can be controlled, directed, and weaponized. They learned to enter what researchers now call lucid dreaming, a state where the mind remains conscious while the body rests. But the Norse took this knowledge further. They discovered that specific types of rest could enhance different aspects of combat performance. Deep sleep restored physical strength. Light sleep sharpened mental focus. REM sleep enhanced reaction times and combat instincts. The sleeping chambers at archaeological sites reveal the sophistication of these practices. Different rooms were designed for different types of rest. Some were aligned with the winter solstice, others with the summer sun. The Vikings understood that the body's natural rhythms could be manipulated to maximize combat effectiveness. The psychological preparation was equally important. Warriors would visualize their upcoming battles during these trance states, mentally rehearsing every movement, every strike, every possible outcome. They emerged from the small death with their minds programmed for violence and their bodies primed for war. Contemporary accounts describe the terrifying effects of these practices. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 provides a detailed example. English chroniclers describe how Harold Hardrada's berserkers fought with unnatural fury, showing no signs of pain or exhaustion even when wounded. They attributed this to demonic possession, but the truth was far more calculated. The Vikings had learned to manipulate their own biology. They could slow their heart rates, lower their body temperature, and enter states of suspended animation that conserved energy for crucial moments. When battle came, they could explode into action with devastating effect. The spiritual dimension of these practices cannot be separated from their military applications. Norse cosmology viewed sleep as a journey to the realm of the gods. The Volsunga saga describes how the greatest berserkers could send their spirits forth while their bodies lay as if dead. This wasn't mere superstition. The Vikings understood that the mind could travel while the body rested. They used controlled dreaming to gather intelligence, scout enemy positions, and coordinate with other warriors across vast distances. What medieval chroniclers described as sorcery was actually an advanced form of strategic planning. The transformation was complete when warriors emerged from the small death. They had shed their human limitations and become something more, beings capable of fighting for days without rest, of feeling no pain, of striking with precision that seemed impossible. Brother Alfric, a Saxon monk who survived a Viking raid in 991 CE, wrote, "They moved as if they were no longer men, but spirits wearing human form. Their eyes held no mercy, no fear, no doubt. They had become death itself." The Vikings had discovered the ultimate military secret. The warrior who masters sleep masters everything else. They had turned the most vulnerable time of day into their greatest strength, transforming rest from a weakness into a weapon that would terrorize Europe for 3 centuries. The ritual of the small death was more than just a sleep technique. It was a complete transformation of human consciousness, a systematic method for transcending the limitations of ordinary existence. Through mastery of sleep, Viking warriors had learned to become something beyond mortal men, living weapons forged in the space between dreams and death. Imagine facing an army that never grew tired, never slowed down, never stopped. In 866 CE, the terrified defenders of York discovered that Viking sleep mastery could turn small raiding parties into unstoppable war machines. The great city of York had survived Roman legions, Saxon armies, and countless raids. Its massive stone walls had never been breached. The local garrison felt confident when they saw the Viking longships approaching up the River Ouse. There weren't that many ships, maybe 30 vessels carrying perhaps 1,000 warriors. The English defenders numbered nearly 3,000. What the defenders didn't know was that they were about to face something unprecedented in medieval warfare, an army that had weaponized rest itself. King El of Northumbria commanded the English forces. He was a seasoned warrior who had fought Vikings before. But as he watched the Norse forces establish their camp outside York's walls, something felt different. The Vikings weren't rushing to attack. They weren't building siege engines. They were simply waiting. "They're planning something," El muttered to his war council. Vikings don't wait. They attack. What the English couldn't see was the carefully orchestrated system unfolding in the Viking camp. While one group of warriors rested in the ritualistic trance sleep, others remained alert and active. They rotated in precise shifts, ensuring that fresh fighters were always available, while others restored their strength through controlled rest. This wasn't random. It was the tactical application of sleep mastery on a massive scale. The Heimskringla saga records how jarls like Eric Bloodaxe could sustain week-long campaigns through these coordinated sleep cycles. The Vikings had discovered that by cycling their forces through restorative states, relatively small armies could outmaneuver and outlast much larger conventional forces. Modern military sleep research has confirmed that the Norse understanding of strategic rest was centuries ahead of its time. Dr. Colonel James Barker, who studies sleep optimization for special forces, explains what the Vikings developed was essentially shift work applied to warfare. They combined sleep debt management, circadian rhythm manipulation, and stress inoculation training into a unified system. The siege of York lasted 6 days. Each day, the English defenders grew more exhausted. They had to maintain constant vigilance, watching for attacks that could come at any moment. Sleep became their enemy. Every moment of rest was a moment of vulnerability. But the Vikings showed no signs of weariness. On the 3rd day, King El noticed something that chilled him to the bone. The Viking sentries he had observed in the morning were still alert and active at sunset. The warriors who had been training at dawn were still moving with precision and energy as darkness fell. It was as if the enemy force was constantly refreshing itself. "They're not human," whispered one of El's captains. "No mortal army can maintain such vigilance." The truth was more terrifying than superstition. The Vikings had created what contemporary Frankish sources called armies that never sleep. Through their mastery of coordinated rest, they had eliminated the fundamental weakness that plagued all medieval warfare: exhaustion. The system was elegant in its simplicity. Viking forces were divided into 3 groups. While one group fought or maintained watch, another rested in the controlled trance sleep, and the third prepared for their next rotation. Every 8 hours, the groups would shift roles. The result was a force that maintained peak combat effectiveness around the clock. Archaeological evidence from Viking military camps reveals the infrastructure that supported this system. Sleeping areas were positioned at specific distances from activity zones to ensure proper rest. Sound barriers were constructed to protect sleeping warriors from noise. Even the camp layout was designed to facilitate smooth transitions between waking and sleeping forces. The psychological impact on enemies was devastating. The Chronicle of the Franks describes Viking armies that showed no signs of weariness, though they had sailed many days across the Whale Road. Irish annals speak of Norse forces that could maintain sieges for weeks without any apparent decline in combat effectiveness. But the Vikings' sleep mastery extended beyond simple endurance. They had learned to optimize different types of rest for different combat situations. Light sleep enhanced alertness for sentry duty. Deep sleep restored physical strength for hand-to-hand combat. REM sleep sharpened reflexes and decision-making abilities. The Siege of York demonstrated this system's devastating effectiveness. On the 4th day, the English defenders began making mistakes. Sentries fell asleep at their posts. Commanders made poor decisions due to fatigue. The coordination that had kept the city's defenses strong began to crumble. The Vikings, meanwhile, maintained perfect discipline. Their rotation system ensured that leadership remained sharp, that sentries stayed alert, and that fighting units operated at peak efficiency. They had turned time itself into a weapon. King El finally understood what he was facing on the 5th day. As he watched Viking warriors moving through their camp with the same energy and precision they had shown on the 1st day, he realized the hopelessness of his situation. His army was fighting not just against Norse steel, but against a force that had transcended the basic limitations of human endurance. The attack came at dawn on the 6th day. The English defenders, exhausted from days of constant vigilance, were no match for Vikings who had spent the night in restorative trance sleep. The battle was over in hours. York fell, and with it, the last major stronghold of northern England. The Annals Cambrii, a Welsh chronicle, recorded the aftermath. The Norsemen took York through dark arts, for no mortal army could have maintained such strength through so long a siege. But there was no magic involved. The Vikings had simply applied their understanding of sleep as a weapon to the grand strategy of warfare. They had created a military system that could sustain operations far longer than any conventional army, turning endurance into their greatest tactical advantage. The fall of York marked a turning point in Viking expansion. Other English kingdoms realized they faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Vikings weren't just better warriors. They were warriors who had learned to fight without the constraints that limited ordinary men. The secret of their success lay not in superior weapons or greater numbers, but in their mastery of the most fundamental human need, rest. By controlling sleep, they had gained control over time itself, creating armies that could fight forever while their enemies collapsed from exhaustion. The most terrifying Viking warriors weren't just physically unstoppable. They could see the future, predict enemy movements, and strike with supernatural precision. The secret lay in their ability to send their spirits into the realm of the gods while their bodies rested. In the winter of 982 CE, a Saxon spy named Wulfric infiltrated a Viking camp in Denmark. What he witnessed there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hidden in the shadows, he watched as Norse warriors entered states so deep they appeared dead, yet somehow returned with knowledge that should have been impossible to obtain. Their leader spoke of English ships 3 days before any messenger could have brought such news. Wulfric later testified before the Saxon court. He described the location of our hidden supplies, the number of our forces, even the plans we had made in secret council. It was as if he had flown over our lands like a raven. This wasn't luck or superior intelligence networks. It was the most advanced application of Viking sleep mastery, the ability to use controlled dreaming for strategic reconnaissance. The spiritual dimension of Norse sleep practices cannot be separated from their military applications. Viking cosmology viewed sleep as a journey to the realm of the gods, where the barriers between past, present, and future dissolved. The Volsunga saga describes how the greatest berserkers could send their spirits forth while their bodies lay as if dead. Dr. Sarah Matthews, who studies altered states of consciousness at Oxford University, explains, the Vikings had developed what we now recognize as advanced lucid dreaming techniques. They could maintain awareness while their bodies entered deep sleep, allowing them to explore information and possibilities that their conscious minds couldn't access. The practice required years of training and tremendous mental discipline. Warriors would begin their education in childhood, learning to control their dreams the way other children learn to use weapons. The most gifted students could eventually achieve states of consciousness that modern science is only beginning to understand. Archaeological evidence from warrior graves across Scandinavia reveals that these practices weren't limited to elite berserkers. Ordinary Vikings carried sleeping amulets, protective charms, and ritual tools that suggest systematic dream manipulation was a standard component of their war culture. The grave goods tell a fascinating story. Archaeologists have found carved bone needles used for acupuncture-like techniques that induce specific dream states. Silver arm rings engraved with runic symbols that guided dream journeys. Even ordinary warriors were buried with the tools needed for spiritual reconnaissance. The Prose Edda preserves fragments of the training methods. Young warriors would fast for days, consume specific herbal mixtures, and undergo guided dream experiences led by skilled practitioners. They learned to maintain awareness while their bodies entered the deepest levels of sleep, accessing information that seemed to come from the gods themselves. The military applications were devastating. Viking leaders could scout enemy positions without risking human scouts. They could predict weather patterns that would affect naval operations. They could even sense the morale and intentions of opposing forces through dream contact with enemy warriors. The Battle of Malden in 991 CE provides a documented example. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Viking commander Olaf Tryggvason seemed to anticipate every English tactical move. He fought as if he could see into the hearts of his enemies, wrote the chronicler. No stratagem surprised him, no feint deceived him. What the English didn't know was that Olaf had spent the previous night in deep trance sleep, spiritually scouting the battlefield and the minds of his opponents. When the battle began, He was fighting an enemy whose plans he had already experienced in the realm of dreams. The psychological warfare aspects were equally important. Vikings would use their dream journeys to plant fear and doubt in enemy minds. They could appear in the nightmares of opposing commanders, spreading terror and confusion that weakened resistance before any physical battle began. Brother Alfric, who survived multiple Viking raids, wrote, "They came to us first in dreams, bringing visions of defeat and death. When they finally arrived with their ships and swords, we had already been conquered by fear." The Irish chronicles describe similar experiences. Viking raids were often preceded by weeks of disturbing dreams among the local population. People reported nightmares of burning churches, slaughtered livestock, and their own deaths at the hands of foreign warriors. When the actual raids came, communities were already demoralized and disorganized. But the most remarkable aspect of Viking dream mastery was their ability to coordinate complex operations across vast distances. The Heimskringla saga describes how raiding parties scattered across different countries could synchronize their attacks through shared dream experiences. Modern research into quantum consciousness and non-local awareness has begun to explore phenomena that the Vikings may have understood intuitively. Dr. Michael Stevens, a neuroscientist studying shared dreaming, notes, "There's growing evidence that consciousness can access information through mechanisms we don't yet fully understand. The Vikings may have developed practical techniques for what we're just beginning to study scientifically." The spiritual reconnaissance system reached its peak during the reign of Harold Bluetooth in the 10th century. His forces could coordinate massive military campaigns across multiple kingdoms, striking simultaneously at targets hundreds of miles apart. The level of coordination required would have been impossible using conventional communication methods. The system worked because Viking warriors shared a common cosmology and dream language. They had been trained from childhood to recognize specific symbols, navigate particular spiritual landscapes, and communicate through shared mythological frameworks. When they entered the realm of the gods, they could find and contact other trained dreamers with remarkable precision. The most skilled practitioners could maintain awareness across multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. They could keep their bodies in healing trance sleep while their spirits gathered intelligence, coordinated with distant allies, and even engaged in spiritual combat with enemy sorcerers. Archaeological evidence from temple sites reveals the infrastructure that supported these practices. Special chambers were built for group dreaming sessions, with acoustic properties that enhanced shared consciousness experiences. Stone circles were arranged to focus spiritual energy and facilitate communication with the gods. The decline of these practices would eventually contribute to the end of the Viking Age. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia, the spiritual framework that supported dream warfare was systematically destroyed. Without their connection to the realm of the gods, Viking warriors lost their greatest tactical advantage. But for 3 centuries, Norse raiders possessed a weapon that their enemies couldn't understand, couldn't counter, and couldn't even fully comprehend. They had turned sleep itself into a gateway to knowledge, power, and victory that seemed to come from the gods themselves. The most powerful warriors in history were about to face their greatest enemy, not English armies or Frankish knights, but men carrying wooden crosses and holy water. The Christian Church had declared war on Viking sleep mastery, and the very survival of Norse civilization hung in the balance. In 1015 CE, a young berserker named Bjorn Ironside knelt in the snow outside Trondheim Cathedral. His hands shook as he removed the sacred sleep amulets that had protected his family for generations. Around him, other warriors did the same, dropping amber charms and iron talismans into a growing pile. King Olaf II of Norway watched with satisfaction as the tools of the old ways were surrendered to Christian flames. "You will sleep as Christ slept," the king declared, peaceful and powerless, waiting for resurrection. But Bjorn had been trained in the old ways since childhood. He knew that without the sleep mastery of his ancestors, he was just another ordinary man with a sword. The Christianization of Scandinavia began in the 10th century, But it wasn't just a religious conversion. It was a systematic campaign to destroy the foundation of Viking military supremacy. Christian missionaries understood that Norse power came not from their gods, but from their mastery of consciousness itself. The saga of Olaf Tryggvason chronicles the brutal conflicts between traditionalist warriors and Christian converts. King Olaf had converted to Christianity during a raid in England, but when he returned to Norway, he found his kingdom divided. The old berserkers refused to abandon practices that had made them legendary, while Christian jarls demanded complete submission to the new faith. The conflict came to a head at the Battle of Svolder in 1000 CE. Olaf's forces, fighting under Christian banners, faced an alliance of traditionalist jarls who still practiced the old sleep arts. The battle would determine not just the fate of Norway, but the future of Viking civilization itself. Archbishop Adalbert of Hamburg, who advised Christian kings throughout Scandinavia, wrote detailed instructions for suppressing what he called heathen sleep magic. His letters, preserved in the Vatican archives, reveal the Church's understanding of what it was fighting. The pagans have learned to corrupt the gift of sleep, Adalbert wrote to Pope Benedict VIII. They use rest not for peaceful dreams, but for communication with demons. Their warriors draw strength from the very pit of hell through their unholy slumber. The Church's campaign was methodical and ruthless. Christian kings issued specific edicts forbidding the practice of sleep rituals. Possession of berserker sleep kits became punishable by death. The sleeping chambers that had been sacred for centuries were torn down and replaced with Christian chapels. But the most devastating weapon was spiritual. Christian doctrine taught that sleep was a time of vulnerability, when the soul was defenseless against Satan's influence. The controlled dreaming that had given Vikings their power was rebranded as demonic possession. Warriors who had once been honored as guardians of their people were now branded as sorcerers and heretics. The psychological warfare was brilliant. Generations of Viking warriors have been taught that their strength came from their connection to Odin and the realm of the gods. Christianity severed that connection, replacing it with fear and guilt. Warriors who had once traveled fearlessly through the landscape of dreams now cowered from their own unconscious minds. Young Bjorn represented a generation caught between worlds. His father had been one of the last great sleep warriors, capable of maintaining awareness for days while his body rested. But Bjorn had been raised in Christian monasteries, taught that such practices were evil. The conflict between his training and his faith had torn his mind apart. The decline was swift and devastating. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 marked the end of the Viking Age, and contemporary English sources noted a crucial difference in their opponents. Harold Hardrada's forces fought as mortal men, wrote the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. They showed signs of weariness that their fathers had never displayed. The great Harold Hardrada, last of the Viking kings, had tried to maintain the old ways in secret. But most of his warriors had been raised under Christian influence. They had lost the knowledge that had made their ancestors unstoppable. When they faced the English army of Harold Godwin's son, they fought with courage, but not with the supernatural endurance that had once terrorized Europe. The suppression wasn't just military, it was cultural. Christian scribes rewrote Norse sagas, removing references to sleep mastery and replacing them with stories of divine intervention. The sophisticated understanding of consciousness that had taken centuries to develop was erased from historical memory. Monasteries became the graveyards of Viking knowledge. Manuscripts describing sleep techniques were burned or hidden away. The iron tools and amber amulets that had guided warriors through the realm of dreams were melted down to make Christian crosses. The very language used to describe these practices was forbidden. Dr. Elena Peterson, who studies the transition from paganism to Christianity in medieval Scandinavia, explains, the Church understood that Viking power wasn't just military. It was psychological and spiritual. They had to destroy not just the practices, but the entire worldview that made those practices possible. The transformation of individual warriors was heartbreaking. Men who had once communicated with gods through their dreams now spent their nights in terror, believing that any vivid dream was a sign of demonic influence. The confidence that had made them legendary was replaced by fear and uncertainty. Some warriors tried to preserve the old knowledge in secret. Hidden chambers have been found beneath Christian churches, containing the tools and symbols of sleep mastery. But these were desperate attempts by a dying tradition. Without the cultural support system that had sustained it for centuries, the knowledge withered and died. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was more than a military defeat. It was the death of a way of life. When Harold Hardrada fell with an arrow in his throat, the last great practitioner of sleep warfare died with him. The Vikings who survived the battle were ordinary men, no different from the English soldiers they had fought. King Harold Godwin's son, who had defeated the Vikings, reportedly said, "They fought bravely, but they fought like men. Their fathers fought like demons." The age of the sleep warriors was over. Christianity had succeeded where no army had managed. It had stripped the Vikings of their greatest weapon by convincing them that their power was evil. The warriors who had once traveled fearlessly through the realm of dreams now slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of their own making. The suppression was so complete that within a generation, even the memory of sleep mastery had faded. The techniques that had terrorized Europe for 3 centuries became legends, then myths, then forgotten stories told by old women to frighten children. But the knowledge hadn't disappeared entirely. It had simply gone underground, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to rediscover the power that had once made ordinary men into living legends. What if the most advanced military techniques in history weren't lost forever, but hidden in plain sight, waiting for the modern world to rediscover them? Today's cutting-edge sleep research is uncovering secrets that Viking warriors knew 8 centuries ago. In a sterile laboratory at Stanford University, Dr. Amanda Chun watches brain scans of a Navy SEAL who has been awake for 72 hours straight. The soldier's performance should be deteriorating rapidly, but somehow he remains sharp and focused. The secret lies in techniques that would have been familiar to a Viking berserker. Controlled manipulation of sleep cycles that allows the human body to transcend its normal limitations. We're essentially reverse engineering practices that ancient warriors perfected through trial and error. Dr. Chen explains, studying the neural patterns on her monitor. They discovered principles that we're only now beginning to understand scientifically. The rediscovery began in the most unlikely place, Christian monasteries. When medieval monks adopted Christianity, they didn't completely abandon the sleep techniques they had learned from Viking raids. Instead, they adapted them, creating hybrid practices that combined pagan sleep mastery with Christian mysticism. The University of Copenhagen's recent analysis of medieval manuscripts has revealed this hidden history. Texts that scholars once dismissed as purely religious contain detailed descriptions of sleep techniques that match Viking practices almost exactly. The monks had preserved the knowledge by disguising it as spiritual exercises. Brother Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, described meditation techniques that modern researchers recognize as advanced forms of lucid dreaming. The soul can travel while the body rests, he wrote, visiting the realm of angels and receiving divine guidance. The language was Christian, but the technique was pure Viking. These hybrid practices survived in monastery libraries for centuries, copied and preserved by scribes who didn't fully understand what they were recording. The knowledge spread through medieval Europe disguised as religious mysticism, practiced by monks who thought they were communing with God, but were actually accessing the same states of consciousness that had made Norse warriors legendary. The connection wasn't rediscovered until the 1990s, when Dr. Sarah Williams began studying medieval sleep practices for her doctoral thesis. Hidden in Latin manuscripts, she found descriptions of techniques that matched archaeological evidence from Viking sites. The monks had preserved the very knowledge that Christianity had tried to destroy. It was like finding a lost technology, Dr. Williams recalls. The monks had taken Viking sleep mastery and repackaged it as Christian mysticism. They had no idea they were preserving the combat techniques of their ancestors' enemies. The implications were staggering. The peaceful meditation practices that had sustained Christian monasticism for centuries were actually derived from the warrior techniques that had once terrorized Europe. The irony was perfect. The Church had unknowingly preserved the very knowledge it had tried to erase. Modern military research has confirmed the effectiveness of these ancient techniques. The U.S. Special Forces have developed training programs based on principles that Viking warriors understood intuitively. Sleep optimization, stress inoculation, and enhanced awareness training all trace their roots back to practices developed in medieval Scandinavia. Colonel James Mitchell, who oversees sleep research for the Pentagon, explains, "We're not inventing new techniques. We're rediscovering old ones." The Vikings understood that sleep isn't just about rest. It's about performance enhancement, stress management, and operational readiness. The technology has advanced, but the principles remain the same. Modern sleep laboratories use EEG machines and brain imaging to monitor what Viking warriors achieved through careful observation of their own consciousness. The result is the same: enhanced performance, improved endurance, and mental clarity that can be sustained under extreme conditions. The archaeological evidence continues to reveal new insights. Recent excavations at Ribe in Denmark have uncovered what appears to be a complete Viking sleep training facility. The site contains multiple sleeping chambers, each designed for different types of rest, along with workshops where sleep aids were manufactured. Dr. Neil Price, who led the excavation, describes the site as a military academy for consciousness training. The sophistication of the facility suggests that sleep mastery wasn't just practiced by elite warriors. It was taught systematically to large numbers of fighters. The medical applications have been equally revolutionary. Techniques originally developed for warrior conditioning have been adapted for treating trauma, PTSD, and sleep disorders. The controlled dreaming practices that once prepared berserkers for battle now help veterans process traumatic memories and recover from combat stress. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, who treats veterans at the VA hospital in San Diego, uses techniques derived from Viking practices. The same methods that helped warriors prepare for battle can help them recover from it, he explains. The brain's ability to process trauma through controlled dreaming is remarkable. The research has revealed that the Vikings understood something fundamental about human consciousness that modern science is only beginning to grasp. Sleep isn't just a biological necessity. It's a tool for enhancing human performance that can be trained, controlled, and optimized. The implications extend far beyond military applications. Athletes use Viking-inspired techniques to enhance recovery and performance. Emergency responders train in sleep mastery to maintain effectiveness during extended operations. Even ordinary people are discovering that ancient knowledge can help them sleep better and perform more effectively in their daily lives. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery is that the knowledge never truly disappeared. Folk traditions across Northern Europe preserved fragments of Viking sleep practices, passed down through generations of healers and wise women. What researchers thought was lost forever had actually been hiding in plain sight, preserved in lullabies, herbal remedies, and bedtime rituals. The University of Edinburgh's Folklore Archive contains dozens of traditional practices that can be traced back to Viking origins. Children's games that teach controlled breathing, herbal teas that induce specific types of dreams, even sleeping positions that enhance rest, all preserve elements of the sophisticated system that once made Norse warriors legendary. Today, as modern civilization struggles with epidemic sleep disorders and chronic fatigue, the ancient wisdom of Viking sleep mastery offers hope. The warriors who once terrorized Europe with their superhuman endurance had discovered principles that remain relevant in our high-stress, sleep-deprived world. The complete system may never be fully reconstructed. Too much knowledge was lost during the Christian suppression. But enough survives to demonstrate that the Vikings had achieved something remarkable. They had turned sleep itself from a vulnerability into humanity's most powerful weapon. In laboratories and military training facilities around the world, researchers continue to unlock the secrets that Viking warriors took to their graves. They are rediscovering ancient wisdom that could revolutionize human performance, transform our understanding of consciousness, and help modern people reclaim the power that comes from mastering the art of rest. The legacy of the sleep warriors lives on, not in the sagas and legends, but in the growing understanding that true strength comes not from avoiding sleep, but from mastering it completely. The Vikings may have lost their final battle, but their greatest victory, the conquest of sleep itself, continues to inspire and guide humanity's quest for enhanced performance and optimal rest.